Visit licensureexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge.
Well, hello there, all you bright young things out in Radioland, and welcome to a special edition of our Licensure Exams podcast. You're dialed into the past as we explore object relations theory with a 1920s theme. I'm Stacy Frost.
And I'm Dr. Linton Hutchinson. Glad to have you aboard as we roar into the world of object relations, a variation of psychoanalytic theory. So get your wiggle on, grab your Joe, and let's get this show on the road.
All right, let's start by getting everything copacetic. Object relations is all about understanding how our early relationships shape who we are. And here are some key terms that you need to know about.
First up, we've got objects. We're not talking about getting all dolled up or your swell Tin Lizzie. That's a nickname for the Model T Ford for all of you who didn't grow up in the 1920s. It's the concept of object relations theory. Objects are significant people or parts of a person, usually first formed when we were wee ankle biters, who's influenced our psychological development.
Next up is internalization, which is all about how we soak up and incorporate the characteristics, behaviors, and attributes of our objects from yesteryears, usually significant caregivers, into our own psyches. This determines and shapes how we get along with folks.
Then there's splitting, which is a defense mechanism where we see people as either all ducky or all wet, with no middle ground. It's like seeing the world in black and white. Babies experience splitting for the first time when they are interacting with caregivers. The caregiver is considered good, while the baby gets its needs met, and bad when their needs aren't met.
And the last term is projective identification, which is where we project our undesirable feelings onto a person and then act in a way that makes them feel those same feelings. This concept might tickle your noodle and remind you of projection, which is a defense mechanism where a person displaces their distressing emotions onto another person. But projective identification goes one step further than projection. And if you want to learn more about projection, we've got a whole podcast devoted to that, don't we, Linton?
You're hotsy-totsy on that one, Stace. And lastly, transference. Transference, you see, is a real doozy of a concept. In object relation theory, transfer is when a client takes all those old feelings, the ones they had from primary giver times, and starts projecting them onto someone else in the present, like you, their therapist.
And the person on the receiving end of this transference, again, that's you, their therapist, is often left scratching their head, wondering why they're being treated in such an odd way. Now that you've got the important terms, let's dance into the big idea of object relations, which is that our early childhood relationships with primary caregivers create the blueprint for all of our future relationships. These interactions create mental pictures that influence us throughout our lives.
And those mental pictures can change, especially with help from a therapist like you. Nothing is set in stone.
That's right. So how about some techniques that are used in object relations, Linton?
Therapists use many of the same techniques from psychodynamic theories like free association and dream analysis. The therapist, like you, may explore symbols that appear in a client's life and work with the client to interpret those symbols to learn more about the client's inner world.
The interpretation of transference is also significant in object relations therapy. In fact, Melanie Klein, who was one of the founders of object relations theory, thought interpretation of transference was the cat's meow, and that every session with a client should include a transference interpretation.
Now, let's get our wiggle on with a case study.
Okay, how's this one? Tracy, a 35-year-old flapper, Linton, is struggling with chronic relationship issues. She finds herself repeatedly in relationships with emotionally unavailable fellas.
In therapy, you uncover that Tracy's father was often absent during her childhood, both physically and emotionally. Tracy has internalized this absent father as an internal object, leading her to seek out similar relationships in her adulthood.
Using interpretation, you help Tracy see the connection between her past and her present. You explore together her internal object of her father and how it influences her choice in partners.
You provide a safe space for Tracy to express her feelings of abandonment and hurt. This helps her process these emotions rather than push them away.
And once you've established a really solid rapport with Tracy, she starts to spill the beans about her feelings and experiences. She begins to understand her pattern of seeking out unavailable partners as a way of reenacting her relationship with her father, hoping to finally get the love and attention she missed as a kid.
Your empathy and listening skills are crucial in the process. If Tracy feels understood and validated, this will help her trust the therapeutic process and engage more deeply.
And during sessions, transference interpretations are used to address the feelings Tracy projects onto you. She begins to see how her reactions in therapy mirror her reactions in her relationships, providing further insight into her behavior patterns.
Over time, Tracy starts to reshape her internal image of her father. She learns to seek out and appreciate emotionally available partners, breaking her old patterns and forging healthier relationships. So, Stacy, I've noticed you've been a bit anxious and frustrated lately. What's eating you?
Well, Linton, now that you mention it, I have been feeling a bit like a cat on a hot tin roof. Maybe it has something to do with this topic we're, going on about today and with my father. It was always a hard nut to crack.
Sounds like you're projecting some of your unresolved issues onto our dynamics here, Stacy. Could it be that you're seeing me as a stand-in for your dad, trying to get that elusive parental approval?
Well, Linton, you might be on to something there. When you seem busy or preoccupied, I start to feel unimportant.
Can you see how this might be connected to your experience with your father?
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities there. It was really tricky to get his undivided attention because he was so busy dealing with his own issues. I guess I start to think that if you're not paying attention to me, you must not care about me.
Okay, let's work through this. What would it look like for you to see me just as Linton, your co-host, and not as some stand-in for your father?
Well, I guess it would mean being more aware of when I'm slipping into those old patterns of trying to impress and reminding myself that you're not him. Easier said than done, though.
True, but it's a step in the right direction. We've all got our baggage, but recognizing when it's happening is half the battle.
Thanks, Linton. You've always got the bee's knees advice. Well, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today, so let's hit the high notes one last time.
Object relation is all about understanding how our early relationships shape who we are. Key terms like objects, internal objects, splitting, projective identification, and transference are crucial to this theory.
The main premise is that these early relationships form the blueprint for our future ones. By understanding and interpreting our internal objects, we can change maladaptive patterns.
So, object relation theory stresses the importance of early relationships, the dynamic nature of internal objects, the role of the unconscious process, and the fundamental drive for relationships.
Psychodynamic techniques like free association and dream analysis may be used, in addition to therapist interpretations, particularly regarding significant symbols in the client's life and transference in the therapy setting.
Right. And our case study on Tracy showed how these techniques can be applied in therapy to help the client break old patterns and form healthier relationships.
And our little role play demonstrated how recognizing and addressing our own transference can help us navigate our current relationships more effectively.
So keep those noggins sharp and don't take any wooden nickels. And most importantly, remember, it's in
It's
there.
in there.